Hey there, guys! Welcome to another Thursday stream, and this time we're going to be doing something cool. We got two designers here.
Everybody.
We have there we go. We have Jed, our lead concept artist, and an award winner, also for his Project Spark stuff.
A few, yeah.
Yeah, and then we have Matt from our design team as well, who you might know from working on some stuff with Champions Quest. What we're going to be doing is, because we have two really talented designers with us, we're going to be critiquing a community game and going through sort of different design practices to help community members kind of think through design. And we looked through all the levels people sent in, and we thought the one S&D Acid Rain sent, the Desert Treasure level, was sort of closest to it's closest to sort of a bunch of design. It has a lot of design aspects that other levels can cover as well. So
The reason we wanted to go to Desert Treasure was not only to find the treasure, but because it's very much like there's a lot of Spark games that look like this, and so it wasn't kind of something made out of primitives or overtly specific.
Right, exactly.
So I think we're just going to play through first and kind of get an idea. So.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do with mixing biomes is taking the icebergs and tinting those and making those just like, because those are such huge like macro superstructures that you can really change the silhouette of your horizon.
Yeah.
Do you guys think you have an idea of what you might want to start adding into here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like when I look at this, I see him, he's blocking out his adventure and his quest, and you know, that's the exact same way how we do it here.
Yeah.
We kind of, you know, rough in the mechanics and the puzzles and so on and so forth, and then usually like Matt will pick it up and direct it, and we'll sit down, or I'll take a screenshot and draw over top of it and be like, this is kind of what I'm thinking for a lighting scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like we work in tandem a lot doing stuff like that on Champions Quest. I think we get some pretty cool results.
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest things that we do, which I see is done in here too, is you want to work in the broad strokes and then whittle your way down, because you'll find you spend too much time detailing things, which is like
and then when you go to art it up, having a tone in mind.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you want this area to seem scary or some sort of like basic emotion that you want to pull out of the player, have that in mind before you start building it too. Like, you know, it really helps your, like, if this place is supposed to seem scary, maybe it's like lit too brightly, for example, right? It's one of the issues I have, or that I see pop up in a lot of UGC, is like when someone's trying to design something that looks natural and it's very symmetrical, right? There are things like that are just basic design principles that just put some thought into it a little bit, you know? Like there's if you're gonna make a big rock formation, unless you want it to be noticeable, don't make it symmetrical, make it feel natural, make it feel like there's, you know, erosion.
one of the things that I do that I think really helps a lot is when I'm doing a path, I think if this is a well-worn path or it's a dirt path and a lot of people have traveled on it, I just go through and I remove a little bit of terrain so you get a little bit of a dip down and the grass is higher. Grass is going to naturally have like more dirt or like around the base because of the roots.
So one of the first things I would start to do, and Matt mentioned this previously, was kind of start to establish some consistent themes to help guide the player. Like in the desert biome, we have some really cool, really vibrant like fan plants and cactuses and stuff like that that deliberately kind of jump off the screen when you use like the biome tools. So like clustering vegetation around an area where you want to draw the player's eye, so you get that color contrast.
Because I know, like, in deserts, you have a lot more of that layered, just like in our materials here. You have that hard edge change of the different soil types. But when you have a large mountain like this, you can start to really see the tiling. So one of the things I usually do is I go in and I just try to break up some of those a little bit to get a little bit of a soft transition.
One of the things I like to do when I build an environment in Spark is kind of establish my defining silhouette shape to the environment, like really early on. So the more successful level creations we've seen where people take props and use them as giant macro shapes and interweave it with terrain, you know, rather than kind of building terrain and then just placing props on top of it. You get a lot more of a natural feeling.
Oh yeah. So you use this glow a lot when you're designing. So what is it about this glow that?
It's got a flicker to it. It's also just like when you tint it, like to a low opacity, it just gives a nice color blend between different colors to call things out. Like right now, it's just like a default blue. It might actually work pretty good for that. I'm just kind of trying to get a general idea of like drawing the player into this little area. And so,
so like you're adding a tiny bit more life, so the player's a bit more drawn to.
Yeah,
wanting
and
to
I mean
go to
it's
that
really subtle, but like when you start, because you don't want it to be in your face because it's just a card, right? And it becomes real noticeable when it's clipping through geometry. When you start getting like areas around here where you get some of it peeking around this little edge, it's like it's a little bit more movement. Maybe the players like actually down here, so they don't see that much of the actual effect. But when you get that flickering, there's something there that's kind of drawing you
movement,
there.
right?
Yeah.
And
how important are lights in what you do? Because if you look at showcase levels, things like that, you'll see a lot of lights down.
Yeah, lights are hugely important, especially like my default that I really get drawn to is I like really contrasty stuff. I like things that are going to be a little bit more saturated as well. And so I usually try to build up the shadows a lot more, which means I try to get the sun at a good angle to where I'm getting either long casting shadows and finding pools of light, and then I find out of the little pools that I'm getting from the shadow shapes which ones I want to place lights into to kind of help soften it, because when you just have that hard edge by default, we just kind of have a little bit of a hard edge, and that's what I'm trying to soften up here. That's usually like I'll place a kind of a bigger fill light, so this is like the default's usually like 10. I'll crank it up to about 13 or something like that, and then just kind of, again, you just kind of back off, see what, like where it's lighted too much.
So like I can see it outlines the shadows more too.
Yeah, and so we're just kind of trying to soften that, push, and it helps blend the colors between the lit area and the shadows a little bit more. Like we're getting. One of the first things that I noticed too, like when we first came across these, it almost looks like a water spring was kicked up. And so that blue would definitely be something that I would try to build off of more, especially since it is like essentially like a save point almost. It's kind of, blue has now become the color of safety for you. So wherever you have like want more of a calming, safe area, I would tend to go a little bit more blue and then kick up a little bit more red or something like that to drop a little bit more of a danger.
It might even be able to be cool to play that up. Like, I don't know the mythos behind the world, but maybe these are little water springs, and there's a little oasis of like prop vegetation that's sprung up around these. So it takes that idea and just emphasizes it even more, that whenever you run across one of these things, it's it's good, and it reinforces that behavior. And then what you can use that for is whenever you use that color or those kinds of props, the player just subconsciously knows that this is a good thing. And so you start to establish these themes of like good and bad, right? Like
how do you determine, and at what point do you determine what the sun angle and the sun position is?
I think that it has everything to do with tone and atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like, what are you trying to do? You know, like, if you're trying to make a spooky graveyard, right? That was a pack we released. And the tone and atmosphere of that was super important. And how we got that was lighting. We put that new sky dome in there, and we dimmed the lights down. We spent a lot of time lighting the shadows, making them really colorated with that sickly green. And just kind of nailed the mood, right? And that was, it just dictated everything. It was like, we want this to be creepy. We want it to feel like, you know, like kind of a scary, spooky, Halloween-y, necromantic feel. And that informed our color decisions. It informed, when you look at the skyline, the silhouette was all these, it was all the trees, right? When we designed those trees, we wanted them to look like fingers coming up out of the ground. Mm-hmm. That was the design decision behind those trees. And so when you play that level, you look at the skyline and you see these big, sickly clouds and like these fingers coming up over the skyline, and it automatically just starts to like pull those tones and moods out of the player. This is what Matt's doing right here is exactly what I was talking about earlier, is using props to break up just the terrain. Because like our terrain sculpting is amazing, but there are things that it can't do. Like it can't give you really clean, crisp edges like that. When you get that big kind of like horned spike coming out, like you'll never be able to really sculpt that with terrain because it's too small.
Yeah, and so I usually will try to just look for really interesting shapes with the rocks, and then crank the size to really big, really small. Again, like I try to go like big first, because the more you can cover with one prop,
the better.
The more you can actually go into detail later on.
Yeah. I like that term you used there, stamping. You like come up with a template of sort of like feature a bunch of props, and then you stamp it kind of.
Boom. So like I was liking all those shapes together, and then you can scale these around depending on how big you went, rotate, and again you play around until something clicks with you, and you may find something where you're like, that just didn't work at all there.
And one of the things you really want to concentrate on, that scaling makes really easy, is you want a nice combination of large, medium, and small shapes. Like in compositional kind of theory, right? If you have 3 objects, you have a large one, a medium, and a small one, like 3 stones, your eye just scans them and goes right to the small one.
Huh.
So that
this is another thing that I do, like after I've placed like a couple rocks and other things that are stacked on top of each other, I'll go through and I just start adding a little bit of terrain to help kind of bleed it in. Great one for the woodlands is being able to use that mossy ivy one. Like I'll go through and place that in there. You just switch to the add brush, go in, and you start using the actual cursor to find out like where it's going to hit, and start just blending it in. But even from there, it starts giving you more things, like you're getting some different rock texture up there now.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a nice warm sun like this, taking something like that, you're doing it already right there. But it's bounce light from the sand. So if you have an object, the sun's coming over, you're casting a shadow right here. It bounces off the sand and comes back, and you get a really nice, warm, natural feeling to it. It just makes things pop and look sophisticated, just like instantly.
I don't even know what radiosity is. Someone said bounce light is like poor man's radiosity. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, that's you're trying to simulate radiosity by that, and radiosity essentially it's when light bounces off of an object that has color. That color is going to transfer with the light of it, right? So you get a white wall, like in the area we're in now. The white wall is getting some of the red from the other wall, and so you
think that like you have to have these story moments throughout that are impactful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a thing of contrast. You have areas of interest, clustered interest and importance, and you have areas that, you know, are just kind of like your beautiful areas that you run through. This clearly is a quest giver, so this is an area of importance in this level. So playing up, like designing this area around that specifically would be like, is super important.
Yeah,
like,
I also place the vegetation here because when you do get rainfall, this is where the water would tend to build up more. So there's going to be a lot more vegetation here.
So you actually placed that because you thought about naturally.
Yeah, and when you think about that stuff enough, it just becomes like second nature.
Yeah.
I try to reuse an asset that I find really useful as many times as I possibly can before it becomes really noticeable. And then once it becomes noticeable, trying to tweak things, but it's really trying to work as smart as you can. Having bigger scaled objects too on the outskirts of your main paths help fill in that empty space, and then you start bringing in smaller details to where the player's actually going to see it, and that's when you have like the little pockets of other detailed clusters in the environment later on that aren't necessarily story driven.
One specific tip is I found that the castle rooftop terrain, if you scale the Y all the way down and turn all the brown, you make some pretty cool wood paneling.
Oh yeah.
That you can use for inside.
I generally use a lot more lights when it's a darker scene, just to make sure things are tastefully but ambiently lit. You're working with a less direct light source. I also tend to parent lights to my characters a lot, faking what's called ambient occlusion, right? So like, if you have a character in a night scene, oftentimes they're very hard to see. So if you parent a little light in your assembly over top of your character, that's just kind of just a pale moonlight or something, right? When you look at the horizon line, right? Like if you were going to finish this level, you don't want to see the edge of the water there, right? So what you might do is kind of go blow up, like sculpt some huge terrain, really cool shapes out there that kind of hide that, and then throw a bunch of atmospheric fog in front of it so you actually feel like you're in a real environment.